You are research.
No.
Okay.
So what does home means to you?
Home with family, we live. Yeah. At home.
Let's see, I've grown up in a two-story house with a backyard. Living in Maryland, I've lived in a two-story townhouse in what would be considered Section 8 housing. I've lived in an apartment in D.C. I now live in a double-wide trailer with my grandmother, but my mom also lives in a two-story house in Florence. So I've experienced what would be poverty, and I've also experienced what would be lower middle class family. So I've kind of experienced the standard housing for the most part, and then the country housing, living in a trailer, which isn't really that bad. The structure itself, it always changed. It was always something different, but rather it was always loved ones, or rather for me, it was my grandmother or my mother. No matter where I considered home, one of those two women who were the matriarchs and the pillars for my life, and are the pillars for my life, one of them had to be present. If one of them weren't present, it wasn't home. It's not home if they're not there, and that was a big thing.
In my opinion, a home is something, someone, or some place that just allows you to feel comfortable, like no matter what. It's a place that acts as a foundation for everlasting memories, and it's a place that you can always go to and feel welcome and just feel safe no matter what else is going on in the world.
A household for me is one where a family is contained, or your conception of home is where a family is. For me, that's based on like Nigerian values of home, Christianity, and education. And within that construct within Chicago, it was like going home was more of an oasis for me, away from like American world and the American ideals that I faced whenever I would leave my home. So going home was also a way to escape whatever troubles I may be facing in the outside world, and my home was sort of like a sanctuary for me.
Well, typically, anybody would describe home as like the structure that they grew up in. However, for me, home is a little bit more of what makes that structure home, and like aspects of where you grew up that you can find elsewhere in the world. Because I don't necessarily only feel at home when I'm in that structure that I grew up in. I tend to feel at home when I find elements around the world or in other places in the States that remind me of where I grew up.
Home is a place of safety and warmth for me. I always think about my family, especially my dad, my mom, and my little sister. And it's just a place where I can go and be safe and know that I can talk about anything, say whatever I want, be myself, and not be judged for it, but also be kept in check.
Home is a safe space where I can feel happy, I can feel that I'm safe, I can feel comfortable, surrounded by people whom I love, like my family and my friends. And it's also a space where I can be myself, or if not always happy, I'm always comfortable about being me and expressing what is going on. It's a place that I miss a lot, and it's a place that I like very much.
When I say I want to go home, I always imagine going to Hawaii. It has never been a structure. It's never been where I live. It's always been where I grew up, which is the land of Hawaii. I grew up in Section 8 housing at one point, then I moved into the suburbs, and ironically I felt more home in Hawaiian homesteads and the reservation than I did, in this nicer house in the suburbs. And I think that's because at the time I lived with most of my family. Even though there were more people living in a smaller space, we took care of each other, and I think that's what home embodies.
really places like South Africa and Ghana, where I saw families live in these shacks that weren't much bigger than like a one room, no running water. There was just really like a room for people to sleep under some type of shelter, like these shanty houses or something. And that was more troubling rather than interesting in a way. But it did bring a lot of things to my attention, because even though these people didn't live in what I thought would be a standard home, they were still very happy for the life that they had, and they still loved their families just as much as I love mine. And there was just this idea of I'm content, I'm happier, and like though I don't have it all, I have more than what some people have.
They didn't consider home in the way that a lot of us consider it. Like, they didn't have much to go back to and live in, but they were playing out in the courtyards. There was kids playing out in fields of trash, and they were still happy no matter what. To them, the home was each other. It wasn't an actual stationary place. As long as they had each other, their siblings, their mother, their family, they felt at home.
You can go from beautiful scenery of Table Mountain, and 10 minutes later you're driving through the wine farm. Half an hour later you're on the other side of the mountains and you're in a nature reserve. But then you come back to Cape Town and you go into areas where you find people playing in the streets at 10 o'clock at night, and they tell it's the most dangerous part of Cape Town. And it just shows the neighborhoodness that certain communities have. That for me is what home is about. That I can, go and sit by my neighbor and know my neighbor's name and the children's name and their parents' name, because in the community that I come from, we have people that's been living there forever. And now the children's children is staying in that house. That is South Africa. That is Cape Town.
I was really surprised that as soon as we got to Ghana, I remember saying out loud, "Oh my God, I'm home." And I think that's because the look of Ghana, with just the trees, the rinky-dink houses, they looked so much like the village I grew up in. The genuine beauty that came out of these people when they greeted you, when they took you into their home, when they showed you their families. It just, to me, that's what made me feel like home. Then that was so confusing that I was on like a different continent. I wasn't even on an island, and I still remembered feeling like home.
My most emotional country that I went to was Ghana. Being African American, that was my first time seeing the continent of Africa. So that was a very emotional experience for me. I called my parents crying, like, guys, I'm looking out the window and I can see the continent of Africa, and it was like the craziest thing ever, and it was really exciting. So I think that was definitely the most powerful country for me, being the first African country that I visited. There was one local who actually came up and was telling me about a repatriation process where basically they would give you land to live on. If you were an African American living in America, they would give you free land to live on in Africa, so basically that you could come back home to like the motherland where your people are from. And it was really, I felt very accepted and very welcome.
One thing that's interesting I've seen though is you would live with an extended family, often a series of brothers and their wives and the grandparents, and the kids would all live together in a couple houses all side by side in a village. And when those same families move to the city, sometimes they will purchase like several floors of a building, and so they'll have a half dozen apartments all in the same block. And so they're trying to maintain that sense of communal, like extended family living, even when they have to live in separate apartments and they don't have the big open village spaces. So I've seen a lot of those kinds of spaces in traditional settings, extended family houses or houses close by that all share family members.
One of my newly made best friends on the ship, Dravia, he took us to meet his family. One big difference was that Dravia's family was much bigger than mine's. And that created more of like a larger sense of community, I would say, in his home. Because when we met his family, we met his family and his extended family, like all his brothers, his sisters, his cousins, all his nieces and nephews, and his grandparents too. Within my home, it's just 6 of us. That sense of like a stronger community because of more family members was definitely different.
Myanmar was pretty similar. I felt like to some places in India that I went to, I feel like I've recognized that a lot of people have a lot of what they want, and that includes what they need. But in Myanmar, I saw a lot of people, they had just what they needed, and they were fine with that. And it was even more of like a comfort at their home. They were very self-sustainable people. They only used what they needed, and they conserved what they could, and they were very environmentally conscious and community oriented. So it was very much like the whole community was their home. It wasn't just one structure like we see in the US a lot. We see in the United States a lot, like, this is my property, these are my property lines, and it was an entire village, it was an entire community. Everybody looked out for each other, everyone worked together. And I think that the homes, like the actual physical structures, their homes reflected that mindset and that the way of life, as far as having 4 or 5 stove pots outside so the whole community could come over and cook dinners together, and 4 or 5 water container structures so that everyone could conserve and use the same water, instead of everybody having their own and everyone worried about like just themselves and just their families.
Home. Home is like.
It's good in English.
You know what? Can you pause that, please?
The first time I asked him, was like, what is home to him? He got immediately choked up, and I didn't know why. And he asked me to pause the video. So once I paused the video, he explained to me that he had been kicked out of his home, and him and his friends have been living from car to car, just trying to like make it together.
Because home is just
outside.
I don't know what to say. It's too difficult for me. Home is just a place that is safe, sweet.
Sweet.
Yeah. You know what? When you have something like fighting with gangs, and when you fight with your friends, there is only one place you can go.
Never been to Singapore.
That's home.
That's home.
Yeah.
You know what? Because if I fight with them, I can tell the police because they are my friends. So I can go home and think about them, and I just relax my mind. So that is, home is just a place that you can do everything in your mind. And that place that you can sleep safely.
Yeah.
In China, I noticed that they were very protective of their home. It wasn't something that they discussed freely, because for the most part they live just like everyone else does. It's a very modernized country, so people live in all sorts of houses, whether it's, you know, a house, a townhouse, an apartment, but it's all still very centered around family. And the interesting thing about that is that it was very close, like their family was off limits, their house was off limits, their house and their home was something very sacred to them. So it was something that they guarded with a lot of their personality. And I thought that was really special, really interesting that home is something that they keep so near to their hearts.
What makes my home special? I think the communicate makes my home special because I only have very close relationship with my husband and now with my son. But I really worry about the relationship between my parents-in-law. Communicate is important between the parents-in-law and me. United, we go together, come together, and discuss together. Not maybe you think Chinese members are not independent, but I think if we have some troubles, we can talk each other, we can discuss each other, and we can deal with each other. this is perfect.
The other thing is I stayed in an Airbnb in Vietnam that was like a block away from the backpacker party bar district. And it was very interesting. You go right around the corner from the bar street and you're in this courtyard. And kids are in little walker trainers, it's like you would have any kid in their home. Kids would come back from school and sit in a little restaurant there and have like a little snack meal or whatever. Old guys were playing cards. When they had a family, just sat down out there and had dinner. I felt like I was in this really interesting kind of public social space like you would find in traditional kind of villages around the world, like the village square. And yet it was tucked in behind like a parking lot just off this crazy backpacker street. So it struck me that you might feel like, oh, this is a tourist district. And it is on that street, but literally like behind those shops, people are living normal, non-touristy lives, but they have an apartment and they don't have a yard. So the yard is this courtyard where cars and motorcycles are parked, and you do all manner of social life happens right in that space. And that to me was really special, just to walk through that and feel like I had a window into their daily experience.
I change as a person, but my concept and how I feel when I go home never changes. It's always my family, the same people I've seen growing up from the time I was little. So it's kind of like me living in the past and the present, and I know they'll be there for the future also. So home is always a constant wherever the rest of my life varies.
In English, we really equate home with house, and that can be wrong in so many situations because where you live isn't always where you feel home.
Everyone should know that home is not it's not a social construct. Like, home is different in everyone's, and so one person may consider home to be their actual physical house that they live in. Another person might be like, it might be a place like the beach or something. So I think everyone should understand that and respect that, and not automatically assume that people are just talking about a building or a house when you ask them what their home is.
A certain type of comfort that you find in a place that you're familiar with, and I feel like I found that comfort and familiarity in places that I've never been before.
Family is important, and family is an important ingredient of home, and everybody that I interview, they would always include family in that answer. So I feel like family makes a home in many countries.
Everybody had a very strong sense of family. Felt very strongly towards, like, that's my family, they come first, those are my friends, not just my family, they're my friends. Everybody was very family oriented.
No matter how big the house, no matter how small the house, the idea of home was centered on family. Like, the structure itself is ever changing. Whatever the, thrill is for that moment is what the structure may look like, but we never can forget that home is going to be where the heart lies, and it's where the family is always located.